Hello class, I'm going to make a series of short videos that review the different types of effects that you can create in Cinema 4D. Today I want to start with rigid bodies and go over the basics of how they work and show you a short project to get you started. So this is what we're going to be looking at today and trying to build. And so what I've got going on is stairs with some dominoes with a ball that hits the dominoes and then hits a ball. So I want to recreate this for you. I'm going to start by creating a new project. Okay, and in this project we're going to try to think about creating things in a quick and fast way. And so with my stairs and my dominoes, I used cloners in order to make those. The benefit to that is that they are quick to make and quick to place. So I start off with my cube. This is going to be a stair, so I'm going to name it. And I'm going to change the sizing. That's looking pretty decent. I'm going to use a cloner. And so remember, the cloner is great because it can make duplicates. So I want to have a cloner, and I'm going to call it stair cloner. Okay, and this can stay as a linear cloner. And right now I have everything moving up. I need to change these so they don't move up as much. So they're almost like right on top of each other, right? Just like that. And they move, say, back in space. So maybe something like that. And I'm just going to change the count. Actually, I want them to be sort of have a bigger step to them. Okay. Great. Next thing I'm going to do is make my domino. So again, I'm using a cube. Okay, and I'm going to change the scale of this as well. So maybe something like that. So I'm going to place it, try to place it on the ground. You can use your orthographic views to help you. Okay, and so we want it to be, we want it to rest on the surface. We don't want it to intersect. So something like that is fine. Okay, and so now I'm going to use a cloner on this as well. Okay, place it underneath. And it's going up. We need them to go, let's change the name. Wow, I'm having trouble spelling. Cloner. And let's change the orientation of these. So I can go back to my stair cloner. Let's see. They were 49, 13. Let's use those same numbers. 13. Oh, wrong way. 49 and 13. And this is going to be negative 49. Okay, and then I need to change, well, actually, we just need to raise all of this up. move it over. And actually, that's looking pretty decent. So I was able to actually use the same numbers that I was using for the stairs. And then I'm just going to doot. Okay, so this is looking good so far. I do want to alter these models just a little bit because I want to give them a little, I guess, the ability to catch more light. So these objects are perfect. They have perfect 90-degree angles. And when you have perfect objects like that, it doesn't give the light the opportunity to rest on certain edges. And so what I'm going to do with actually both of these, I'll start off with the stairs, but I'm going to first turn these into a editable object. And the editable object is required for us to use the dynamic system anyway. So I'm going to grab my original stair and I'm going to get the edges of that original stair. Let's see. Whoops. And so I want to be able to see my outlines. So I'm changing this. We'll do just lines. Okay. So now I can see it a little bit better. So I'm going to actually, I've pressed Command A to select all of them. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bevel the edges. When you bevel the edges, it softens the harshness of like a three-dimensional looking, well, I guess a 3D computer rendered object. And so I'm going to press M and I'm going to press S for bezel. Since I selected all the edges, it is going to bevel everything. So, okay, there we go. That looks good. Let's take a look at this and just, we'll go back to object mode. So now you can see there's this sort of flat edge here. That's sort of nice because it helps to define the stairs. So when we light this, we'll get a little more light catching there and it feels a little more, it'll feel a little more realistic. I'm going to do the same thing with the domino. First, in order to do that, I need to make sure I make it editable. Okay, and my object's over there. I'm going to go to edges again, and I'm going to press Command A to select all of them. And I have the bevel tool still selected, so I'm just going to pull myself in here. I'm going to pull that in just a little bit. And you can see how like it's defining the edge, and that's what we're really trying to get. So, you know, beveling, it softens the edges of, you know, these three-dimensional shapes, but then also allows for light to sit on those spaces. So I really like that. Okay, great. So I want to set up the rest of the room here because I want to use, I'm going to be using some HDRI rendering. So I want to be able to bounce light around, and I need walls in order to do that. So I'm going to create a few planes. Okay, this will be my floor. I'm going to move it in place and then just make sure it is in the right space. So right here, I want it to be sort of like slightly intersecting the floor or just resting on it. And then let's just make it big enough. So we're just going to extend it out so we are not going to see it. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to make a duplicate of this by pressing Control and dragging it down. And then I'm going to change the orientation. Let's do X. So that's going to give me the back wall. Back wall. And I'm going to move this backwards somewhere here. Okay, let's do another duplicate. So again, I'm holding and grabbing the item and pressing Control and bringing it down. This is going to be my side wall. And I'm going to change it, there we go, to Z. So it just, without having to rotate it, I can just change the orientation. So there we go, got something So let's name it right, side wall. Okay, perfect. So in addition to this, I need to have a ceiling. I want to have a ceiling, so I'm also bouncing light there. So again, taking my floor, duplicating it by pressing Control, and we're going to call it ceiling. Okay, and I'm going to pull that up here. Okay, so I'm leaving these two areas open. I'm going to, my camera is going to be down here, but I'm also going to make a few objects that are going to be used as my lights. And so I'm going to use more, I'm going to take two more planes, and actually they're going to be duplicates of these guys. So my side wall and my back wall. So I'm going to duplicate the back wall, and I'm going to think about these two walls as being glass walls that have just natural light coming out of them. So this is going to, I'm going to change the size because this does not need to be so high. Oops, I guess the width doesn't need to be so big. Okay. So this is going to be, whoops, as I don't press the right buttons, light. Okay, so front light. And so then I'm going to also grab that one and duplicate the side wall to create the side light. Grab that, pull it over here. So I do have a room set up. So we are going to be, so these two items, I'm going to create a texture for them that allows them to emit light. So if I create a new default material and I double click in here, what I'm looking to do is create luminance. So luminance in this, you see how the light, how the sphere went from being dimensional to being flat. So this is now emitting light, and so we're going to apply this to both of these surfaces. So let's actually zoom into my space here to get us in there. Oops, sorry. Get us through the wall. There we are. I need to get farther in. There we are. Okay. And so I'm going to have a camera, and since I'm here already, I'm going to set this camera up. So I'm going to have a camera that is down here. And this camera is going to, shoot this whole, what's going on here. So I want to set this up. So I can create a camera by, setting up my default camera, which is what I'm in right now. And if I go to create and then camera, this is where that camera is going to be located. So if you change your viewport and you like the shot, turn it into a camera, and you can always come back to it. So I'm going to call this main camera. And let's put the A at the end. Okay, and so to get in, I guess to view through this camera, you are going to press this little button here. Okay, see now it says main camera. So I don't want to move around when I'm in my main camera. I only want to do it when I'm in my default camera. But so here, it says main camera. I'm going to move around to show you those windows, and I want to make sure that I'm in my default camera. Okay, so we've got our camera set up there, which is awesome. And then we have our two walls, which is a little hard to see. There we go. Our two walls that are going to be emitting light. Okay, so let's actually roll back in there. Okay, and let's just see how to make those lights work. Okay. So inside of here, those planes will be emitting light, but we need to set some stuff up in our render settings. So the first thing I need to do is add an effect, And the first thing I'm going to always do is add ambient occlusion that softens the shadows and makes things look really nice. I'm then also going to add global illumination. So, let's see, find it right here, global illumination. So global illumination will be taking the light emitting from those windows or those planes and lighting up my scene, so I don't even have to have lights. So let's just take a quick look at this. I'll go into my main camera. Let's see how this is going to look. So I'm rendering to the picture viewer here. So it first does this irradiance cache. So this is where it's trying to figure out where all the light is hitting, and then it does the full render. Okay, so it's looking pretty decent. You can see where we're getting some shading on the stairs, which is really nice to define their edges. The dominoes have a smaller bevel on it, so you're seeing a little bit of that light here. Okay, so we're set up to render, but now we need to make this dynamic. So I'm going to pull out of here. And I'm going to change the dominoes into dynamic objects, dynamic rigid bodies. And so what a rigid body does is we can have it respond to physics and collision. And so ultimately what we're going to do is have that ball come and hit all these dominoes so they fall. And so I'm going to, let's make these into rigid bodies. So I'm going to select the cloner in order to do this. And when we use a cloner, it looks at all these items as being separate, which is really nice. So I'm going to go to Simulations tag, and I'm going to go to Rigid Bodies. Okay. So the rigid bodies will now react to physics. So if I play it, okay, they fall through the stairs. That's because they're reacting to gravity. And so there are a bunch of options we can set here to affect how these things influence each other. But I first want to just set up this simple scene to give you a sense of what this can do. Okay, so first, okay, goes to the ground. What we need to do now is create collision items. So these stairs have to collide with our dominoes, so they just stand up. So I'm going to click on my stairs, and one thing, just make sure that you do, is make sure that all the objects that you want to be rigid bodies are editable. If they're not, they will not work. So if your simulation isn't working, that's probably why. So let's go and go to Simulation tag, and whoops, I pressed the wrong button. Simulation tag and collider body. So what's happening now, these stairs, they're not going to move. They're going to stay where they're at, but they allow the dynamic objects, these rigid bodies, to hit them. And so now they're just, you may have seen like a very small motion. Okay, that was the domino sort of just like resting in place. So if I were to take this whole group, my whole dominoes, pull them up, actually, you can't move anything unless you go to the first frame, because otherwise it's calculating the simulation. Okay, so this sort of works. You can see that they're colliding. Excellent. So let's put them back into space. And one thing that you might want to do, so like even if your dominoes are, like maybe you didn't place them perfectly, if you press play, they will fall down and sit correctly. And what we can do is we can set the dynamic body's initial state. So even though you may have set them wrong, if you let them just drop and fall into place, you can set the initial state. So I can click there, and so when we go back in time and then play again, there's no change, like they don't have to drop. And so this can be done, and I can show you a more extreme version of this. So say like, let's leave them there, and press play. Okay, so they all sort of like fall down. Okay, so if we want this to be their initial state, if I go back, okay, so that's where they rest. That's where they start. And so this is nice because sometimes you might want to like drop things in this way. Like you want to create like maybe pebbles on the ground, and you want to scatter things places and then just like leave them there. This is a good way of doing that. So let's undo what we did. Oops. I have to clear my initial state. So going back to my dominoes. And in order to get to this information, you have to click on the tag. So this is the tag for the dynamic body. Click there. And let's go back to my initial state. Let's clear the initial state, and then they come back. So that's great. Oop. And I must have went so far back that I got rid of my stair tag. So here we're going to put in my collider body. Awesome. Go back. We're good. I am going to set the initial state on those dominoes. Okay, and then I'm going to make the floor. The floor needs to be a collider body as well, because eventually one of these are going to fall off and hit the floor. Okay, so in order to trigger this animation, I'm going to create a ball that is going to hit the first domino to send them all flying down. So to do that, I'm going to be using a spring, and I'm going to use hair in order to create, I guess, the pole that the ball is swinging from. So to do that, I am going to go to simulate and then spring. Okay, so I'm going to grab that guy. And I'm going to turn off my lights here so I don't have to see them anymore. Oops. So I'm pressing these little guys, side light, okay, get out of my way, and my front light so I don't keep running into them. I'll turn them on when I want to render again. Okay, so I created my spring. Let's see, where did my spring go? Okay. Okay. So actually, let's delete that for a second. So I'm going to create my sphere. My sphere I'm going to bring over here. It's going to come and hit the first domino. I'm going to change the radius. I'm going to bring it down. I'm going to change the amount of segments, bring that up just so it looks a bit smoother. I am thinking, okay, so this thing is going to, this might be an okay spot for it to live. Okay, so now let's go back, sorry, and let's make my spring. So dynamics and spring. What the spring is going to do is allow us to get this swinging motion. So out of the box, you're not really seeing anything. But what you have to do is define where the spring is being attached. So I want my spring to be attached to my ceiling and to my ball. I'm going to change my ball to being dynamic, I mean not dynamic, but being editable, just so I make sure that it works with everything that I'm trying to do. So when you click on the spring, you've got two options, object A and B, and so this is where they're going to be attaching. And so I'm going to pull in my ceiling. I'm just going to drag that into there. Okay, and you can see, oh, it's being held there. This is part of that spring. And then it's going to go to the sphere. Okay, so it's sort of not in the space that I want it to be in. And let's see what happens when I press play. Okay, nothing's going on right now, which is fine. But we want this to hang over top of the ball. And so what I'm going to have to do is change change where it's positioned on the object. So right now it's being attached at the center of the mass of my ceiling, okay? And so it's going in the center of that plane. I'm going to change this instead to be offset. So what that does is it allows us to say, okay, it's here at this point on my ceiling, and I'm just going to move it based on where it was at on that point. So this is X, Y, and Z. So I'm going to move this over, so something like that. Okay, that's looking pretty decent. I can come into my other viewports to make sure that I am creating a straight line. Okay, that looks good. Okay, so I'm now going to do the same thing with my sphere, okay, which I should call this, like, I don't know. We'll call ball. We'll call it a ball. Ball trigger. Okay. So back to my spring. Okay, so center of mass. Instead of being at center of mass, I'm going to offset it. So I just want it to move up to the top. Because if it's in the middle, it's going to move in a way that I'm not looking for it to move. So I'm going to pull this, whoops, wrong way. Move it up so you can see the red line. It's moving up to the top of the ball. Okay, that's great. Okay, that's looking good. And so now that's connected. I need to make my ball dynamic, so it needs to have a rigid body tag on it as well, because it needs to be able to fall, and it also, like, it needs to be able to move around. It needs to be able to hit those items. So let's see what happens when I press woo. Okay. So when we just press play, the thing's bouncing around because the spring is pulling it up. So I have to change my spring, and I need to change its, set the rest length. So this will keep it from popping up. So now if I play, okay, now it just sort of settles. Okay, perfect. So now I need to take my ball, and I'm going to move it. I'm going to move it, and I'm also going to slightly rotate it. Okay. So when I play this now, woo! Okay, so it's now going to move. Okay, and so actually I'm going to move it back. Let's move this back a little bit more. And I'm just going to move it up a little bit so it sort of falls and swings. Let's see what it looks like. Whee! Okay, that's perfect. Okay, so it's doing what I want to do. I need to extend the animation, so I'm going to change that from being 90 to being 300, so hopefully you can see the full range of the dominoes. Okay, perfect. Okay, so what I need to do now is we have this like string that is holding this object, but it's invisible. So let's go back to my camera and let's look to see what this looks like. It's hard to see up there, but that ball is going to feel like it's just floating in nothingness, and nothing is holding it. Okay, so this is all looking pretty good, but I want this to be attached to something. So let's pull ourselves out of the main camera. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a spline that we're then going to turn into a hair object. So I'm going to start off by using my spline pen. So spline pen, and I'm going to go into, let's see, this is pretty decent. I'm going to make a line from about here to here. Okay, and so that's great. Click off of that, and I'm going to move these points. I'm just going to figure out where my spring is at. Oh, and my spring is in the total wrong direction to where my spline's at. So I need to move my spline over to the beginning of that. So let's take this point of my spline. I'm going to move it over. Okay, spline, we need to move over even more. Okay, we're almost there. Almost. Okay. Okay, that's sort of right on. Let's check out where it's at here. Not too bad, but I'm gonna move this down slightly. Okay, like that's almost perfect. Okay. So what I'm gonna do is this now needs to be this spline now needs to be a spline, it has to have a spline dynamics tag on it. Okay. So this is going to allow it to act like a piece of hair. And so let's play it, see if we get, okay, right now it's falling, which is good. We want it to move, but we need it to be attached to the ceiling and attached to the ball. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to set this to be fixed. Okay, so fixed, set it. Okay, let's see what happens. Okay, and it's the wrong point. Okay, so actually let's undo that. Let's go back in time. Okay, and I'm going to actually select that point, and I'm going to fix that point. So let's pick back, let's bring back our simulation tag, our hair tag, simulation, spline dynamic, and I'm going to, with this point selected, press set. Okay, let's try this again. Woohoo, it works, but it doesn't follow the ball perfectly. So now what we need to do is we're going to create another tag for the spline, and this is going to hold that other point on the ball. So I'm going to go back to the hair and constraint. Okay, so there's a lot of different constraints we can use. This is connects this point to the ball. So what I'm going to do is click on the spline, click on the tag, make sure we can see this. I'm going to select this point, all right, and I am going to take and set this object. So this object here, I can click on my arrow and select my ball, okay, which I'm not getting the ball. Let's actually, we can do it in the menu here. That works exactly the same, and it makes sure you get the right thing. So I have this point selected and the ball in my object, and if I press set, they will be connected. Okay, so let's go. Whee! Okay, awesome. And you're getting like a little wobbliness. You're seeing this line sort of wobble. This piece of hair only has one point, so it is just working as a straight line right now. If I had more points here, it would sort of flip and flop and do that kind of thing. But for what we need, it just sort of needs to look like a little pole. So we still can't see anything here. Okay, so if I were to render this out, which we're not going to see anything because we're in the wall. So let's get out of there. Okay, believe me, you're not going to see anything. Let's go to the main camera. Let's do this. There's still not going to be anything up here. So it's still going to feel like that's sort of floating in space. So how do we actually make that into a physical item? So it's actually pretty easy. What we're going to be doing, I'm going to get on my main camera again. So I'm going to click that, get on my main camera. We're going to make a sweep. So we're going to put the spline underneath the sweep with a circle. Okay, the circle's super huge right now, but if we select the circle and change its radius, boop, something like that, now it looks like this is on a big, huge pendulum. It's getting a little wonky, so we're going to have to, there might be a few things that we can do to change that, but honestly, this is working out pretty decently from where our camera angle is at. Okay, and so the last thing that I did in my version was that I had another ball here that then would be hit. So just to show you how to set up the dynamic again, first just placing our ball, and so I'm going to make this pretty small so it can sit on the step next to this. Going to move it over. I'm going to check the other viewport see that it's sitting there nicely on the step. Just looking pretty good. Oops, I need to get back in my main camera. Okay. I'm going to up the amount of segments here so it feels a little rounder. And remember, if I want it to be a dynamic object, I'm going to make it editable. Okay, and apparently I've made it really, really dense. It does not need to be that dense. And that's the danger of not looking to see your lines. Okay, that feels okay. What I had previously was maybe a little much. Okay, that's good. So let's make it let's make it editable. That's great. Okay, and so now we're going to add the simulation tag of the rigid body, and we are going to let this hit. Whoop! And it got squished. Aw, poor little ball. I'm going to maybe move it a little bit so it maybe gets knocked instead of being squished. Oh, still squished. Maybe let's set it here on the floor. Or I might need to make it bigger. Let's see. Aw, my poor ball. Okay, so let's maybe move a little bit farther up. Woo, there we go. Perfect. Knock that thing right out of there. So this sort of rolled around a little bit. So you see how it sort of settles? We probably want to play a little bit and set its initial state. So remember, I can access that by clicking on the dynamic tag, and then we're going to be in dynamics and set the initial state. So now it rolls around a little less. It still rolls around a bit. Aw, dude. Okay, but you get the idea. So these are some of the basics. You can mess around with how these things are affecting each other and bouncing. And so if I were to go into my domino, there's a whole bunch of options to change in here. And so I want to select, I'm on my cloner object, but I want to select my dynamics tag. And there's a few things that we can change. If we go to collision, you have these options for bounce, friction, and collision noise. So the bounce, what that will do is if I up this to something crazy, let's try 70%, it's going to change how bouncy these collisions are. So let's see what happens. Okay, so I think there was a little more bounce to them, and they're also moving around a little bit more. Friction refers to how much energy is lost as it hits other objects and collides. So right now, friction's pretty high. If I were to lower this to 10%, let's see if we can see any difference here. Okay, you see how they're all sliding? Ah! They're sliding because they don't have any friction. So they can maintain the energy from the initial ball hitting them. So like that's maybe not what we're looking for. So that was up to 90 originally. And you can see how they were pretty bouncy too. Collision noise, what that does is it makes sure that there's some variation in how these things are moving around. So that variation helps to make it feel less robotic. So these are all things that you can change to make this look a little different. And so, you know, messing around with how bouncy something is. Here, let's put that up to 90%. And change this down to 5%. I want to see what happens. Okay, so they're all sort of like bouncy, 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 bouncy down the stairs, and they all fall down. Okay, so hopefully that illustrates what that does. I'll undo. Okay, looking good. Okay, and even their bounce was making them move a little bit, so I'm going to bring that back down to 5%. Yep, now they're not moving anymore, which is fine. Okay, good. So a few other things. Forces. No, actually, I think I'm going to make another video for this. We'll talk about how this works. But so this is just the basics to get things moving around. If you have any questions on this, please feel free to let me know, email me, or give me a call. Hopefully you can use it within your project. I'm going to be going over a series of other things to help you guys understand how to create some of the other effects that you're looking to create in your projects. So hopefully this was helpful. Feel free to contact me with any questions. All right, I hope you have a great day.